Okay, how about we start this? Hello everybody, welcome to Archival Adventures. I am Anthony Wright Day Hernandez, Community Collections Archivist here at Virginia Tech. I am hoping that you can hear me. I'm hoping that the music is not too loud. Please do let me know if either of those things are not true, so that I can correct them. But let me say hello to everybody who's already in chat. So let's see, hello Lord Portico, hello Hannah, hi Key Squared, hi Fludan. The music's a tad loud. Okay, I will bump it down a bit. Let me know if that improved it at all. Hello Philip. The last stream that took place in here was a Mario Kart stream on Friday, I think. I don't know. So they had shifted the room around and stuff. Setup to date just took a little bit longer. Mostly audio, because the chord, there was no volume change on the music. Lovely. That should hopefully have changed the music down a little bit. Do let me know if that's not the case. But I got it sorted. It just took me a few minutes. So we are live, we are here, and we're gonna do our normal archives stream. The plan today is we've got materials focused on basically they're diabetes guides, as well as cookbooks from the late 19th century and early 20th century. We've got stuff going back a few decades before the discovery of insulin, and then we have stuff going forward a few decades after the discovery of insulin, and I thought we would take a look at that, mostly because when we were doing the National Grange stuff a few weeks ago, we came across a cookbook that had an entire section of recipes designed for people with diabetes, and it struck me as unusual, and that was a cookbook from the 70s, and so there was a comment made by one of the other archivists who was in chat that we had a number of materials with recipes specifically for diabetics. And while that is sort of true, it's not as true as, or at least it wasn't as easy to find any that were that style. Honestly, that was the best example that I was able to find of something that provided a lot of resources for someone with diabetes to figure out what to eat. But we're going to share what I did find, and so that is the focus today. Before we get started, though, I do want to start with the land and labor acknowledgement, as I typically do at the top of this stream. So Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo and Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that legislation and practices like the Morrill Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands, both locally and in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tutelo and Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous student, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. We must also recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through Inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to Ut Prosim, that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Okay. Thank you, as always, for being here, and also for your support in my choice to pay attention to that statement at the top of every one of these streams. I have heard from a number of you that you really like that I read that at the top of every stream, and I think it's important to keep it in mind, so thank you for that. All right. Trosnieren gives your attention for our honesty with history matters. What? All right, so we're going to start with this pamphlet today. This pamphlet is from the Health Food Company, Philadelphia edition. It is from 1878. It is the oldest item that I found that specifically talked about diabetes. I didn't look. There were options. I could have gone back into the incunabula. I could have gone back into like the, we had a book that I shared during the, I think it was the olives episode, the episode where I found everything I could about olives. And there was basically an herbarium or like a book in Latin from France from the 1400s that talked about plants and medicinal uses for them and things like that. It's possible I could have found something about diabetes in there. It just would have been a deep dive that would have taken a lot of additional research that I simply just don't have time for in preparing for the stream. Having to pull things together once a week for this stream, I don't have time to do that kind of in-depth research. But diabetes is a medical condition that has been known at least since the time of the ancient Egyptians. And so it's entirely possible that medieval sources and Dark Ages sources will have information for the treatment of sugar in the urine, which is what it was described as. So I did not go into those types of really old sources because it's simply, it grows exponentially harder to find them when you get into those older sources. If I was specifically doing a research topic on the history of diabetes, though, that would be a direction to go. That would be something to look into. So we're starting in 1878. That is the oldest item I pulled. The newest item that I pulled is from 1980. Not because it is the newest item that I have, but simply because I wanted to, like a lot of what we have is focused around the 20s, so kind of near the actual time period of the discovery of insulin. And I wanted to be able to compare pre-insulin stuff to post-insulin stuff, and so I needed some later things as well. So the finding aid command is there this week. It'll give you information about how to look things up in our catalog, because there is no finding aid. These things are all from the Rare Books collection, so they're individual items, but we will look at them as we come to them, and I hope that you all find this interesting. So, yeah. Let's actually get going. A window around here real quick. Also, how is everybody today? I hope that you are having a decent week. I will say, as the Community Collections Archivist, the person in our archives who is responsible for gathering materials about history that specifically relate to historically marginalized communities, the news this week has been distressing and interesting. It is interesting intellectually from a work perspective of documenting history, but also I work very closely with historically marginalized communities, and the news this week has not been great for historically marginalized communities. So particularly women or people with uteruses. So I will acknowledge that that exists. I would prefer that we not dig deeply into it in the chat today, but if you do, it's not a completely off-limits topic because this is a show about history, although today's focus is specifically on the history of diabetes. So we'll switch over to sharing the document here. You ready for sunshine? It's been at least a week since you've had sun. Oh gosh, I'm sorry about that, Hannah. Okay, so the health food company and their products, well, I need to autofocus on this thing because camera is not presently in focus. Okay, the health food company and their products, opinions of physicians and others concerning them. Philadelphia edition. I'm not certain who the health food company is. That would be something that I would definitely want to look into. But I also think that this might actually tell us. I will note, we are not a medical archives. We do not have a medical archives here. And there will not be medical advice given on the stream today. These items are in our collection because they relate to the history of food and drink, and they are here as part of our broader collection of materials around the history of food and drink. So this starts off, to whom it may concern, having tested the products of the health food company with very satisfactory results, we heartily recommend them, convinced that the superiority of these preparations will manifest itself to all who use them. And there's names and addresses here. All from people in Philadelphia. This was a marketing tactic that was used, especially quite common with patent medicines. The flim-flam medicines that actually did not cure things but claimed to cure everything and could actually harm you. This was a common tactic with those, but also with all sorts of medical things, was to have local residents of the area you're trying to sell to, everyday people, listed with their addresses as endorsing your product. Kind of similar to the influencer advertising that's done today on places like Instagram or YouTube or Twitter or Twitch. So yeah. And Portico, if you care to, you should have the ability to drop that command on the other channel as well, but you don't have to. I'm just noting that you should have permission to make that happen if you wanted to. Because we're looking at a wide range of books, we aren't able to load all the links in the Finding Aid comment. Oh geez, you're gonna look them up as we go? Well, you definitely won't be able to drop the links over on the other channel. So anyway, whatever, I'm gonna keep reading. The health food company. A medical gentleman who has made the subject of food a careful study for many years was invited to acquaint himself with the plans and operations of the Health Food Company of New York and to report his conclusions for publication. He accepted the invitation, and his very reliable and instructive account of his interview is herewith presented in his own language as originally published. I'm particularly interested in something to do with diabetes, and there was something to do with diabetes in here, which is why I pulled it. So I'm not just going to present this booklet about the health food company, because that's not the focus. I'm going to skip ahead to the section titled Diabetes. There's still a company called the Health Food Company, but they're in Italy. Interesting. Hey, thank you, Lord Portico, for dropping the announcement. And yeah, if you want, the call number for this is TX558W5H431878. All right, I'm going to read through and actually look at what this booklet says about diabetes. So this is, again, from 1878. Diabetes by W. W. Hall, AMMD. MD, medical doctor. I'm not sure what AM stands for. If anybody cares to look it up and share in chat, that'd be lovely. Portico, you are amazing. Thank you. There are two forms of this deadly disease, the diabetes insipidus and the diabetes mellitus. The former ordinarily runs into the latter. The daily secretion of water is frequently enormous, reaching in some cases to 5 or 6 gallons. It is a wasting disease, and one which frequently terminates life in a few weeks or months. The sufferer, meanwhile, eating well and therefore feeling that nothing special is the matter, when at the same time a fatal disease has got hold of him. The first symptom of this disease, which arrests attention, is the frequent call to pass urine, and the fact that a large quantity is voided at each attempt. It is not uncommon for pain to accompany the operation. At the same time, there is great thirst and often a voracious appetite. The mouth is apt to be dry, the tongue clammy and sticky, and often very red. There is flatulence and indigestion, and the bowels are usually constipated. With the fearful drain on the system which we have indicated, debility and emaciation must surely follow, together with pain, especially in the loins and back. The limbs become feeble and almost powerless, and active exertion is rendered impossible. Okay. There is a simple test which those whose evacuations of water is excessive would do well to apply, in order that appropriate remedies may be availed of. It is simply the addition of a tablespoonful of yeast to a pint of the fluid, which must then be stirred and left in a warm but not hot place. If fermentation follows, the presence of sugar is established. Evaporation of another pint will enable the operator to secure the sugar crystals, not unlike those of the grape. For the purpose of determining that the disease exists, this test will suffice. It will also indicate approximately, by the acidity of the fermenting fluid, the amount of sugar. A graduated test tube, called a urinometer, is also serviceable, as by its daily use the varying percentage of sugar from day to day is to some extent determined. To void 2 quarts of urine daily, having a specific gravity of 25 degrees or more, proves the existence of dangerous saccharine diabetes. For a long time, there was no known cure for this disease, and its victim usually perished from debility or fell into pulmonary consumption. So far, a very, very detailed sort of scientific analysis, introduction of what is the disease, how can you determine that somebody has it, seemingly very reputable, up to like in the description of how to do the test, things like that, and seeming very scientific for 1878. This statement that for a long time there was no known cure, while accurate, implies that there's a cure, which there definitely was not in 1878, because we still don't have one today. For a long time, there was no known cure for this disease, and its victim usually perished from debility or fell into pulmonary consumption. All attempts to cure the disease by medication have proved unavailing. Nearly every article of the Materia Medica has been tried from time to time, and while there have been occasional instances of amelioration, we have yet to see the first case permanently cured by drugs. Yet in the present state of our knowledge, we do not look upon diabetes as necessarily a highly dangerous disease. If taken early, it can be cured in 9 cases out of 10, provided always that the patient will submit to be controlled. Control means good behavior, especially in the matter of eating. Without intelligence here, the case is always hopeless. But it always means air, sunlight, exercise, bathing, free perspiration, abundance of sleep, freedom from engrossing care, moderation in the use of sexual function, and an avoidance of every source of brain and nerve exhaustion. We have saved hundreds from dying by simply telling them how to live. So they're claiming that this is a cure. What this is honestly a lot of the same advice that people with diabetes receive today with regard to behavioral changes to mitigate the disease and help reduce its effects, but it's not a cure. They were doing well up to a point. Yes, indeed, Key Squared. So it's definitely not a cure. It also implies that it is essentially an intellectual or moral failing on the part of the person with diabetes, and that they need to correct their behavior in order to not, in order to cure the disease, which is a judgment on the patient for a biological condition, not a failing of moral character. It sounds Protestant. Unsurprisingly, this is from America. So, yeah. Hot baths to induce perspiration are of great value. The truth is, however, that the treatment is chiefly dietetic. The food and drink must be regulated by science and must be scanned as critically and prepared as carefully as if it were the food of an infant. It must be totally devoid of starch and sugar. The best possible food is the whole wheat gluten freed from white flour and containing no particles of bran to irritate the internal viscera. This pure, bland gluten appears to be well nigh specific in its action. It quickly regulates the bowels and relieves the constipation. It very rapidly nourishes and builds up the system. It restores the brain, which generally suffers in this disease, to a normal condition. Honestly, I would not be surprised to find that the health food company is in some way related to Kellogg's, based on the sentences that we just read. And in fact, I have a couple of Kellogg's sources here. I do not know if this specific company is related to Kellogg's. Kira, if you happen to be in chat and you know, please do let me know. But the bringing up whole wheat gluten, to me, strikes me a little bit of the approach of Kellogg's, which developed. Gosh, we need to do a whole stream on Kellogg's, and I might need to bring Kira on for that because she is very much an expert on that. I'll put a pin in that, and I'll see if I can get Kira to come and do a guest stream where we can talk about Kellogg's. It's very interesting history. Anyway, I'm going to focus back on this. The sugar disappears from the urine and the secretions gradually lessens. When this point is reached, bodily vigor and elasticity will not be long delayed. To obtain this gluten, address the health food company. Milk and cream in moderation, and eggs and tender beef and mutton, and such green things as spinach may be partaken of in all stages of this disease, but the chief article of diet must be the pure gluten, cooked in any simple way. The fact of the value of gluten as a remedial food in this terrible disease has been known for 40 years. Dr. Camplin of London had diabetes and relieved it by using gluten. He thought the relief came from the employment of wheat bran, and accordingly recommended bran food for the purpose. Bran crackers and bran flour were accordingly prepared for use in such cases, and diabetes was relieved in many instances, and the patient starved to death instead. We have conversed with dozens of victims of the bran theory, some of whom have been too feeble to repeat the story of their misery in a tone above a whisper. We have been able to convince them in a few days of the total fallacy of the bran theory by restoring some of their old strength through the use of pure, branless gluten and other appropriate means. All the good derived by Dr. Camplin or any other diabetic patient from bran came from the gluten, which is always consolidated upon the outer chaff or hull of wheat by the weight of the upper mill stone. There is a good deal of gluten in all such bran, but it is inseparably associated with the hull, and the hulls, when swallowed, ruin the digestion. A tea made of clean, fresh bran would do good service, were it not that to drink it to any useful extent would necessitate swallowing more fluid than a diabetic patient should take. For drinks in this disease, only gluten tea or pure water or cereal coffee or milk or buttermilk are admissible. As we have said, very little fluid of any kind should be taken. The thirst being properly quenched with crumbs of ice. Ale, beers, and wines, and liquors containing alcohol must be scrupulously avoided, as if any of these are used, the cure is usually delayed. The great difficulty in treating this disease is to induce the patient to do precisely as he is directed. He obeys implicitly for a few days, and finding his worst symptoms abated, concludes that his case wasn't a very severe one after all, and plunges into white flour bread, or potatoes, or rice pudding, or beer, or some other form of dissipation, and suddenly discovers that the old enemy is upon him again, harder than ever to shake off. I would be curious too, Hannah. I am also not familiar with what cereal coffee is. So please share what you discover. Oh. So that was the section on diabetes. We actually have a heading in this booklet called cereal coffee, so I'm guessing it was a product of theirs. But, oh, you've got some info. A cereal coffee, also known as grain coffee, roasted grain drink or roasted grain beverage, is a hot drink made from one or more cereal grains, so like chicory, roasted and commercially processed into crystal or powder form to be reconstituted later in hot water. The product is often marketed as a caffeine-free alternative to coffee and tea, or in other cases where those drinks are scarce or expensive. You've seen a lot of grad students going back over and over again while reading journal articles, but you think that's cereal coffee? With an S. Oh, geez. A key squared. That was good. So yeah, it sounds like cereal coffee with a C is something like a chicory or stuff like that. It's interesting that that was a term I had not been previously familiar with. So, all right. Sorry, my little controller here refreshed. Several well-known cereal coffee brands are Nestle, Caro, Postum, and Inca. Other brands can be found at health food stores and at some grocery stores. Some common ingredients include toasted barley, malted barley, rye, chicory, molasses, and beetroot. Huh. This specifically mentions cocoa and its products. Let's see what it says. Cocoa and its products have been largely used as substitutes for the well-nigh universal tea and coffee, but they have proved heavy and somewhat difficult of digestion by thousands. It is a pity that this fragrant bean could not be more generally employed, as it is rich in that element which exists neither in tea nor coffee. We mean nutriment. But the majority declare it to be sleepy stuff, and although its use is happily extending, it can never become the universal beverage. Probably the cereal grains are the source to which we must go for the perfect food beverage, in which nutriment and flavor shall be scientifically blended. This is the thought which has actuated the health food company in the preparation of their cereal coffee. So yeah, when they were talking about cereal coffee, in the diabetes section, they were trying to sell a product that they actually make. And they do indeed mention chicory in here. Chicory and peas and beans and rice and corn and rye and sweet potatoes. And a host of other substances have been browned and infused in boiling water as substitutes for coffee, but they have all failed because they have all been based upon starch in various forms. Real coffee contains little starch, and any successful substitute for it must be quite free from that tasteless and nearly useless food substance. The cereal coffee of the health food company appears to fulfill every indication and to meet the precise want. The beverage produced from it is a powerful supporter of human life, and it is appetizing and delicious, an appetizing and delicious adjunct to the daily bill of fare, while leaving the brain and nerves uninjured by any noxious stimulating power. Lacking the tannic acid and the powerful narcotizing principle of tea, it neither deranges digestion, induces constipation, nor lowers the vital tone, as does that potent agent for evil. The browning and parching process being conducted in vacuo create no deadly empyreumatic oil, such as always exist in ground coffee and its substitutes. So, overall, this booklet gave a little bit of information about how, that sounds reliable, although we would have to take it and verify it with other sources. Because in reading further, this booklet actually does seem to be essentially selling patent medicines. So its reliability is suspect because it is using the same advertising to sell the products that it's making as people who made patent medicines did. So the Flim Flam artists who the snake oil salesman, I believe, is the American euphemism or terminology the con artists who were just trying to get people to buy whatever they happened to put in a bottle by telling them that it was a miracle cure that could cure anything. And it does seem like the health food company in this booklet is taking that same sort of advertising approach. Whether or not any of their actual products are based in modern scientific knowledge from the 1870s, by using that advertising approach, it implies that they are dishonest, and we would need to verify any information that we wanted to rely upon from this. That said, it started out, like the section on diabetes started out sounding very reasonable for how they would go about testing for the condition. I suspect if we found other sources from the same time period, we would find that that is indeed how you test, because their target audience is people with diabetes, and so they want people who are being tested, people who are determining that they have sugar in their urine, to then come to them and buy their products that they claim will cure the condition. So relying upon a truthful account of how to test for it would be in the interests of this company. That's the trouble these days. There aren't enough people who want to oil a snake. On topic though, even though this is clearly bunkum, it's fascinating. And yes. So like the treatments they're proposing seem to be fake. I can't speak to the efficacy of a gluten primary diet, but one of the things that they're saying, they actually talk about somebody from a few decades before in London who put people on a bran diet that apparently was not nutritious, and people were wasting away and dying from the bran diet, and they're advocating primarily gluten but with other things like vegetables and stuff like that. And so it's entirely possible that the diet they propose would be effectual, and may have been a decent approach at the time. So it would require more research, but the way that they're selling it, it comes across as fake. So yeah, that'd be something that we would have to look into. We would not be able to rely solely upon that. The next item that I have is called Diet for the Sick. This is from 1885. Call number is RM 219 H52 1885. This is a first edition. Diet for the Sick, a treatise on the values of foods, their application to special conditions of health and disease, and on the best methods of their preparation. By Mrs. Mary F. Henderson, author of Practical Cooking and Dinner Giving, illustrated. Quote, Man kills himself rather than dies. Published by Harper and Brothers in Franklin Square, New York, 1885. So this is specifically this is a guide for housewives, essentially, which were quite common in the 19th century. It's a guide for housekeepers or housewives who basically needed to know a little bit about absolutely everything under the sun. They had to be able to help little boys play army in the yard. They had to know about exotic animals from Africa. They had to know about how to prepare special diets for treating ailments. They had to know first aid. They had to know all sorts of things. And so we have published manuals by authors that were not necessarily female, were not necessarily written by women, but they almost always have a woman's name as the author. So it's actually a case where we're aware of more modern settings where a woman will write under a man's name in certain genres. In this genre of the Women's Household Manual, it was not unheard of for a man to publish under a woman's name in order to actually sell the product. But this one includes a section on diabetes. 1885. Diabetes. The formation of sugar in the urine is what is characterized as diabetes. The cure of this disease is almost entirely dietetic. So again, they call it a cure. It's a lifestyle change to manage the disease. It is not a cure. And consists merely of the patient and persistent... what? Yeah, that's what it says. It doesn't read well. The cure of this disease is almost entirely dietetic and consists merely of the patient and persistent taking of foods which contain no sugar nor starch, which latter is converted by natural processes into sugar in the system. So I think the "and" is just extra there. I think that sentence is meant to say, consists merely of the patient persistently taking foods which contain no sugar nor starch. Anyway, fat and albuminoids are given in their place. Dr. Dobell recommends very highly the pancreatic emulsion of fat for diabetics. The following is a list of dishes which are allowed and prohibited a sufferer from diabetes. The dishes are allowed which are not marked prohibited. So it's a listing of dishes. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. If I don't say they're bad, then they're good. Oysters and clams. Raw or cooked without flour mixtures, oysters can be rolled in egg and gluten for frying. Soups, all kinds without flour, rice, or other starchy substances, and without the prohibited vegetables. It does seem like an odd organization, yeah. Fish, all kinds including lobsters, crabs, sardines in oil, etc. Meats of all kinds, poultry, game, etc. Livers, on theoretical grounds, are prohibited. I would be curious as to what theoretical grounds prohibit the consumption of livers for diabetics, but interesting. Vegetables allowed: cauliflower, spinach, cabbage, string beans, cucumbers, lettuce, greens, mushrooms, young onions, and olives. Celery, asparagus, and tomatoes are questionable. Celery and asparagus are questionable? I get tomatoes. Tomatoes are really sugary. But celery and asparagus? Those seem odd as... Sour apples cut in quarters, dipped in egg and rolled in gluten, and fried in hot fat make a good substitute for potatoes, and may be used moderately. You do find asparagus questionable for all audiences. Vegetables prohibited: potatoes, beets, turnips, peas, beans, carrots, parsnips, rice, sago, tapioca, vermicelli, or others containing sugar or starch. I'm sorry, what? Like, no, I get, they clearly thought that starch was problematic. Sugars, processed grains of certain types, we know are problematic. Today, my understanding is whole grains are generally okay. Again, I'm not giving medical advice. You should, if you are seeking treatment for diabetes, work with your doctor or a nutritionist to work out what your diet should be. My understanding of today's understanding is that whole grains are generally okay. Natural sugars found in fruits are generally okay in moderation. But yeah, just vermicelli? I thought vermicelli was a pasta, not a vegetable. That's what confused me. The vegetables that are prohibited are almost all the ones that keep easily over the winter. Given that this book predates refrigerated trucks, you're concerned. Interesting. I had not noticed that, but also I think that would make sense. The ones that keep better are probably the starchier ones. Just generally, they would last longer and just, yeah. What are they meant to eat the rest of the year? Yeah. Can somebody tell me how vermicelli is a vegetable? Because that confused me. Milk, cheese, and eggs. Milk in some cases. Eggs, cream, butter, buttermilk, and all kinds of cheese may be taken freely. Puddings and custards should be sweetened with glycerin. Glycerin. Like, I know what glycerin is. I just I've never thought of it as like an ingredient. Glycerin is a type of carbohydrate called a sugar alcohol or polyol. Glycerin contains slightly more calories per gram than sugar and is 60 to 75% as sweet. Glycerin occurs naturally in fermented foods and beverages, including beer, honey, vinegar, wine, and wine vinegar. So essentially, if you sweetened with sugar or with honey instead of sugar, vermicelli is a type of pasta. You cannot find any reference to it as a vegetable. Thank you, Hannah. I'm just very confused by why vermicelli is listed under prohibited vegetables. Fruits, all kinds of tart fruits, peaches and strawberries with cream and no sugar. So tart fruits, peaches, and strawberries are okay, according to this. All the sweet fruits, as apples, pears, plums, grapes, bananas, pineapples, raspberries, and blackberries, are prohibited, excepting that they earlier said that you could take sour apples cut in quarters, dipped in egg and rolled in gluten, fried in hot fat to substitute for potatoes. Breads and pastry, only those made from wheat gluten flour. The ordinary flour or grains, oatmeal, cornmeal, hominy, etc., must not be used in any form. Beverages. Kumis, coffee with cream and glycerin, no sugar. Cereal coffee, very good. What's kumis? K-O-U-M-I-S-S. Tea, objectionable. No liquors nor wines except claret, Rhine, or other acid varieties. It is still better to reject all wines, sweet or sour, and all liquors, malt or distilled. As much pure water as desired may be taken. Nuts generally. Plenty of exercise in the open air, tepid baths, rubbing, and abundant sleep are desirable. Why is tea objectionable? I don't understand the objection to tea, other than that Americans don't like tea because they were taxed on tea by Britain. Nobody has given me a decent reason for why tea would not be good for diabetics. Kumis is a beverage of fermented mare's milk, made originally by the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Okay, I have heard of this, and I've seen it, I think, on like Anthony Bourdain in Mongolia. But yeah, okay. So that is the information provided by Mrs. Mary F. Henderson in 1885 about how to feed someone who is diabetic. Let's see. Next, I did say we had them. And we get the first one now, titled Science in the Kitchen. Oh dear. Hang on, I need to adjust the camera because the book is too wide. All right. This one is TX715K353 1892. Key squared, I don't think it's going to be quite the type of science that you're thinking. This comes from Battle Creek, Michigan, which might give some of you a hint as to specifically where it comes from. Science in the Kitchen, a scientific treatise on food substances and their dietetic properties, together with a practical explanation of the principles of healthful cookery, and a large number of original, palatable, and wholesome recipes by Mrs. E. Kellogg, A.M. Again, A.M. I don't know what that means. Superintendent of the Sanitarium School of Cookery and of the Bayview Assembly School of Cookery and chairman of the World's Fair Committee on Food Supplies for Michigan. Revised edition, published by the Health Publishing Company, Battle Creek, Michigan. You're just playing with Harvey K's ego. Yeah, no, it's Mrs. Kellogg's this time. So 1892. Again, we're gonna have to do a whole stream on the Kellogg's, and you might be able to get a primer on it from a Wikipedia article, but I don't know. Definitely, there should be a blog post about the Kellogg's on the What's Cookin' in Special Collections blog. 1 second. You're going to see a little bit of my arm while I look up that blog for you all. All right, there are apparently 3 blog posts on this topic. That is a link to the first one by archivist Kira, one of the other archivists here. And Portico, if I can impose upon you to nope, you can't, never mind. You can't drop that link. So give me 1 more second. I was going to impose on you but you won't be able to. So let me do it. Aha, there we go. So yeah, there are apparently 3 parts of blog post specifically on this topic by one of the archivists in our special collections and university archives. And that will take you to the blog and to the first of the 3 blog posts if you want to learn about the Kellogg's. But I will keep it in mind as a potential stream for the future. It's just that I am not the expert, and that'll be one where I specifically need to just have a guest. But this does include, in the section on food for the sick, nope. It is in the section on science. Wait, no. Yes, so this is still food for the sick. It's just food for the sick, bread. There is 1 recipe in this book, 1892. We'll read basically this whole page. For invalids who are able to partake of solid foods, the breakfast rolls, whole wheat puffs, beaten biscuit, crisps, and other unfermented breads, directions for the preparation of which are given in the chapter on bread, will be found excellent. The various crackers, wafers, and invalid foods manufactured by the Sanitarium Food Company, Battle Creek, Michigan, are also to be recommended. Zwieback, prepared as directed on page 289, will be found serviceable and wholesome to be used with broths and gruels. It may be prepared so as to look especially tempting by cutting off the crust of the bread and cutting the slice into fancy shapes with a cookie cutter before toasting. In cases where their use is allowable, many of the various toasts given under the head of breakfast dishes will be relished. And the recipes that we get here, we have 2 recipes for diabetic biscuit. I think you should all be able to see that. I'm just going to make sure it is as clear as possible with the autofocus here. Diabetic biscuit. Make a stiff dough of graham or entire wheat flour and water. Knead thoroughly and let it stand 3 hours, then place on a sieve under a faucet. Turn a stream of water over the dough and wash out the starch, kneading and working with the hands so that all portions of the dough will be equally washed. So that's not an unusual process for some older bread preparation methods. When the starch has been all washed out, as will be indicated by the water running off clear, the dough will be a rubber-like glutinous mass. It may then be cut into long strips, and these divided into equal-sized pieces or cubes. Place the pieces on shallow baking pans in a rather hot oven, which after a short time should be allowed to cool to moderate heat, and bake for 2 hours, when they should be of a dark, rich brown color and light and crisp throughout. If tough, they need rebaking. If the oven is too hot, the pieces will puff up, becoming mere hollow shells. If not sufficiently hot, they will not rise properly. Diabetic biscuit number 2. Prepare a dough and wash out the starch as in the preceding. Add coarse middlings so that the dough can be rolled into thin cakes and bake. I don't know what coarse middlings are. I'm going to need to look that one up. You first heard of Zwieback in Judy Blume novels and only later realized your grandmother had been serving it and you just never knew what it was called. I'm not sure I know the name. As far as it doesn't associate with anything for me. A form of rusk eaten in Germany, Poland, Scandinavia, Austria, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. It is a type of crisp, sweetened bread made with eggs and baked twice. Huh. Okay. I've seen it. It is not something I have consumed regularly. What are coarse middlings? Google knows the term when I... Okay, so wheat middlings. Wheat middlings are the product of the wheat milling process that is not flour. A good source of protein, fiber, phosphorus, and other nutrients, they are used to produce foods like pasta, breakfast cereals, puddings, and couscous for humans, as well as fodder for livestock and pets. It just came to mind since you were referred to page 289 to learn how to make it. Wikipedia informs you it was invented by General Wallenstein in the 30 Years' War. Interesting. Sounds like the washed flour seitan method. Interesting, Philip, that this is a familiar, that the diabetic biscuit here is similar to other stuff that you've encountered. So that's literally the only mention of diabetes in this Science of Cooking book from Mrs. Kellogg's, or Science in the Kitchen book from Mrs. Kellogg's. And I want to make sure we get after insulin at some point. Like vegetarian meat with flour. Oh, that's weird. Hi, was not worth it. The only connection you were able to find between Kellogg and the health food company was minimal. The health food company of New York appears to be the company mentioned that had gluten and cereal-based products starting in 1875. Kellogg finished his medical schooling in New York in 1875 to 1876 before returning to Battle Creek. So probably just the inspiration. That is really interesting, though. Was not worth it. That would be something, if I was researching the history of Kellogg's, that would be something worth investigating to see if I could find anything specific on that connection. The next one we're going to glance at here is called Modern Dietetics. It is from 1915. Call number is RM216J681915. And for anyone out there, these are Library of Congress call numbers, not Dewey Decimal. And no, I'm not an expert, and I can't tell you exactly what RM216 means. I would have to look that up. I don't do the cataloging in that detail here. And call numbers will be different at every library you go to. So this call number will not likely help you find this book at your local library. because it's likely not to be the call number they use. But Modern Dietetics by Doris Johnson, BSMS, Fellow in Home Economics, University of Wisconsin, formerly Supervisor, Ward Dietary Service, the Presbyterian Hospital of the City of New York, and Instructor in Dietetics, Department of Nursing, College of Physicians and Surgeons, Columbia University. Edited by Hazel E. Munsell, PhD, G.P. Putnam's Sons, New York. Chapter 24, Modifications of the Normal Diet in Carbohydrate. Limited carbohydrate diets. So 1915, still before the discovery of insulin. And yet, we are already talking about carbohydrates as being used to control sugars. So diabetes mellitus is a disease of endocrine origin which results in a disturbance in the metabolic processes of the body. Several of the endocrine glands are involved. The pancreas, pituitary, thyroid, and the adrenals are all implicated. Of these, the part that the secretion of the pancreas plays is best understood. The hormonal secretion of the pancreas, insulin, is necessary for the metabolism of carbohydrates. It is known to be necessary for the storage of glycogen in the liver and for the initiation of the metabolism of glucose to carbon dioxide and water, and it probably functions in other parts of the carbohydrate metabolic cycle as well. So they're aware of insulin at this point, but synthetic insulin has not yet been manufactured. Like because that's the 20s. July 27th, 1921 is the official documented date of when Charles Best isolated the hormone insulin for the first time. The pituitary functions in diabetes through the formation of at least two hormones, the glycotropic factor and the diabetogenic factor. The former has been shown to have an insulin antagonizing effect. It probably acts in opposition to insulin in the first step in glucose metabolism, in which insulin is functional in the formation of hexose 6-phosphate. Thus, diabetes may be due to a lack of insulin, or it may be due to an overproduction of the glycotropic factor of the pituitary. Since the primary disturbance in diabetes is carbohydrate metabolism, the limitation of the diet in carbohydrate is obvious. However, the fact that part of both the protein and the fat may enter into the same metabolic pool with carbohydrate means that they too must be considered in the diet. It has been observed that when there has been a severe or prolonged restriction of carbohydrate metabolism, a ketosis results. This is due to the incomplete combustion of the ketone bodies. These normal metabolites of fat, chapter 4, are the primary sources of energy to the body when carbohydrate is not available. They are produced in such large quantities at such times that the tissue cells are not able to metabolize them as rapidly as they are produced, and they accumulate. Approximately half of the protein, as well as most of the fat, contribute to the ketone formation. The part that the ketogenic factor formed by the pituitary plays in controlling ketone formation is not well understood. The exact role which the other endocrine glands play in diabetes is not yet well known and awaits much more experimental evidence before the exact nature of their influence in diabetes is understood. Principles of the diet. Again, 1915. The primary principle of the diabetic diet, as with all other therapeutic diets, is that it should be nutritionally adequate. The foods shown in the basic daily dietary pattern must be included in the diet each day. Therefore, the diet prescription must be liberal enough to allow for at least this minimum amount of food. Insulin may be prescribed as necessary to ensure normal metabolism. So, 1915, they're talking about prescribing insulin. I'm very curious. Because all of the sources say that insulin was discovered in 1921, so how is this book from 1915 talking about prescribing insulin? Oh. The discovery of insulin represents an authentic breakthrough. Hang on. In 1910 and later in 1916 in London, Sir Edward Albert Sharpie Schaefer described in depth that the pancreatic islands are able to secrete a substance capable of controlling glucose metabolism, which he termed insulin, from Latin insula, island, with reference to the Langerhans Islands. Other scholars attribute the invention of insulin to the Belgian Jean de Meyer in 1909. So why do most sources call the discovery of insulin date in the early 1920s? In 1921, researchers from the University of Toronto discovered insulin. But I have a source here from 1915 where they're talking about prescribing insulin. So that would be something to look into. I found one NIH article where it mentioned people attributing the invention of insulin to Jean de Meyer in 1909, which maybe what was done in the 1920s was a more reliable method for the production of insulin. I know multiple methods were used, and that cultivating insulin in pigs was one of the early methods for getting insulin. So it's possible that this is one of those other methods that's being referred to here. Because, diabetes.org.uk doesn't even go back before 1920 in talking about the history. All right, here we go. 1869, Paul Langerhans, a medical student in Berley, discovers a distinct collection of cells within the pancreas. These cells would later be called the islets of Langerhans. 1889, Oster Minkowski and Joseph von Mering remove a dog's pancreas to study the effects on digestion. Flies are found to be feeding off the dog's urine, which is shown to contain sugar. 1901, Eugene Opie discovers that the islets of Langerhans produce insulin and that destruction of these cells results in diabetes. 1916, Romanian professor Nicolae Palescu develops an extract of the pancreas that shows that it lowers blood sugar in diabetic dogs. World War I prevents the experiments from continuing, and it's not until 1921 that Palescu publishes evidence of the experiments. So they skip in this timeline from 1901 straight to 1916, somewhere between figuring out that a lack of insulin results in diabetes in 1901 and Palescu developing an extract of the pancreas that could lower blood sugar in dogs with diabetes. Somewhere between there, somebody was prescribing insulin, because this book talks about prescribing insulin. I'm very confused. I'm guessing this is like the 20s is when artificial insulin was discovered. On January 1922, Leonard Thompson, a 14-year-old boy dying from diabetes in a Toronto hospital, became the first person to receive an injection of insulin. Within 24 hours, Leonard's dangerously high blood glucose levels. Yeah, I've definitely found that information. 1921. Yeah, and so I'm just confused what treatment they're referring to here, where they say insulin may be prescribed as necessary to ensure normal metabolism, because this book is 1915. I'm just going to double check that the year is actually 1915. Ah. Well, there's our answer. The book is miscatalogued. It is not, in fact, 1915. But we have definitely established a timeline for the development of insulin. This book is actually from 1951, not 1915. I will have to correct that in the catalog after this stream. Anyway, I'm going to finish looking at it. Insulin may be prescribed as necessary to ensure normal metabolism, and analysis of the basic daily dietary pattern shows it to contain approximately 1550 calories. According to the discretion of the physician, the diet may be increased above this amount depending upon each individual patient. Yeah, a good old-fashioned typo. Interesting. We'll have to adjust because now all of what was presented here that sounded oh so modern for 1915 was indeed too modern for 1915. It was 1951. What a fascinating mystery to solve. Yeah, that was an interesting adventure. All right, this time I'm just going to double check and make sure of the year. All right. Copyright 1920, although this is an updated version from 1926, titled Dietetics for High Schools by Willard and Gillett, TX 551 W6, 1920. Dietetics for High Schools. Near the end, there is a section on diet in diabetes. Diabetes, so far as known, is entirely a diet disease. So again, this one we have confirmed. Well, actually, it'll be interesting to see what they talk about, because the original copyright on this is 1920, which would be 1 year before the discovery of insulin. But this edition is from 1926, so it'll be interesting to see what it says. Diabetes, so far as known, is entirely a diet disease. The tissues cannot burn sugar. Consequently, the sugar accumulates in and injures the tissues. This must be controlled by a diet with the amount of carbohydrate restricted to amounts varying with the severity of the disease. Carbohydrate is chiefly starch and sugar, and the starch yields sugar in the body. The diet should be carefully supervised and the amount of sugar excreted through the kidneys determined frequently. Expert medical advice is very essential, especially when other diseases introduce complications. But anyone preparing the food for a diabetic patient should be familiar with the type of food that may be eaten. This is the first time that one of them has talked about why starches were to be avoided. And it was because in carbohydrates, they're saying carbs are mostly starch and sugar, and that the starch yields sugar in the body. That doesn't necessarily mean all starches are bad, just that the starches in carbs are bad. But again, this is 1920s, but also the first time that somebody's actually specifically talked about why you would avoid starches. So then it gives information about, we have table 5, percentage of carbohydrate in vegetables, fruits, and nuts. So it's telling you you've got about 5% carbs in lettuce, cucumber, spinach, asparagus, rhubarb, endive, marrow, sorrel, sauerkraut, beet greens, dandelion greens, Swiss chard, celery, tomatoes, Brussels sprouts, watercress, sea kale, okra, cauliflower, eggplant, cabbage, radishes, leeks, string beans, and broccoli. About 10% in pumpkin, turnip, kohlrabi, squash, beets, carrots, onions, and mushrooms. About 15% in green peas, artichokes, parsnips, canned lima beans, and about 20% in potatoes, shell beans, baked beans, green corn, boiled rice, and boiled macaroni. I don't know what green corn is. And then fruits, it breaks them down in similar percentage columns. Nuts, miscellaneous. So this is a book from the 20s that is intended to help the lunch lady to make lunch for students at the high school. And it's going into this kind of detail. In the most restricted diets, only those foods containing practically no carbohydrate are allowed. These are meat, fish, gelatin, eggs, butter, and oils, with tea and coffee, which are not foods. Of these foods, fats are recognized as a good source of energy and may be used freely to provide it. They are often difficult of digestion, however, so that they cannot be used in too great an extent. They are also likely to produce a condition of acidosis if used in excess. In quite severe cases, only those foods containing 5% or less of carbohydrate are allowed. In slightly less severe cases, foods containing 10% of carbohydrate may be used, and so on. In Table 5, the percent of carbohydrate in each common fruit and vegetable is given. People afflicted with diabetes often crave sweets. Saccharin, which has a very sweet taste, is sometimes used, but it does not entirely satisfy the craving, and one soon tires of its extreme sweetness. The following meals are adapted to the diabetic condition, where only 5% of carbohydrate is allowed. Other foods in the second, third, or fourth columns of Table 5 may be added as the amount of carbohydrate allowed is increased. Green corn is young, tender ears of sweet corn or a corn plant developed in order to have young ears that are sweet and suitable for eating. Thank you, Hannah. It was a term I had not heard before, so having that confirmation is good. So for breakfast, they're saying gluten breakfast food and cream. Again, that reliance on gluten. Eggs, meat, fish, including shellfish or bacon. This is breakfast. Gluten bread with butter or butter substitute. Greens, radishes, tomatoes, or other vegetables if desired. Coffee and cream, but no sugar. Dinner, which in this case is lunch. Meat, fish, clams, oysters, bacon, or salt pork, any vegetable from first column in Table 5 served with butter or oil. Gluten bread with butter or butter substitute. Vegetable salad with cheese and oil. Butternuts or pignolias. Pignolias? I don't know what those are. Gelatin dessert, coffee if desired. Pignolias. Pine nuts. Those are pine nuts. And for supper, clear tomato soup. Other vegetables in column A may be added. Eggs, meat, fish, or cheese. Vegetables from first column, Table 5. Gluten bread with butter or butter substitute. Dessert as for dinner. But yeah, this is dietetics for high schools. Specifically, it is a book for people planning meals for high school students from 1920 that included a very scientific approach to what would be allowable foods for students with diabetes. And in modern American culture, it is common to kind of look down on the food service workers in our school systems because they're expected to be not knowledgeable. They're expected to be, low paid, people with low education, and they're generally looked down upon. But they are as much experts in the work that they do as anybody else is. They do it every day. They know what goes into it. They may not be working at this specific scientific level in developing the recipes, but that's generally because United States school systems are developing recipes more at a district-wide level or purchasing prepared products that were created by corporations to be sold to school systems. But back in the 20s, they would have had food service workers that were hired specifically to cook the meals. And they needed to be able to cook in bulk, but also prepare foods that were appropriate for the specific medical needs of the students attending the school. So they needed to be familiar with the carbohydrate and caloric content of the different ingredients that they're putting in, so that if they had a student who had diabetes, they would be able to prepare appropriate foods for them. How do you get clear tomato soup? So you get clear tomato soup in basically the same way that you make a consommé. It's not tomatoes boiled in water and then you eat it. It is, it's more of a consommé. I'm gonna drop a link. Actually, let me mute this real quick so that it doesn't go. You might get a tiny bit of music there. Sorry. I tried to mute it. It didn't work. One of my favorite food-based streamers. There is a video from Emmy Made where she makes a clear tomato soup, which incidentally is not completely clear. Just gonna drop the link on the other channel as well. A consommé devoutly to be wished. All right. Let's see, where are we? 4:05. We will make a short stop in 1923 here. This one I have cotton string holding it together because the binding is not in the best of condition. I may need a foam thing. We'll see. This one is titled Nutrition and Clinical Dietetics. It is RM 216 C3 1923. Nutrition and Clinical Dietetics by Herbert S. Carter, Paul E. Howe, and Howard H. Mason. Two of them, again, with this MA designation. I do not know what it means. I'm guessing just Master of Arts in something. One with an AB. I don't know what AB is. These are things that if I had time, I would definitely go to the internet and dive in, and I could probably figure out what those degree designations are with a little bit of work, but on stream I tend not to go down those rabbit holes. So 1923, and yeah, the spine is not so bad that I need the foam for this one. So, chapter 26, medical assistant. So MA, possibly Snorp and Boss, but in this case, since they're all MDs as well, I'm guessing it's probably more of a Master of Arts in something. But the AB is the one that is really confusing. Right. Diseases or pathological states due to disturbances of normal metabolism. Diabetes insipidus. This disease, characterized by the passage of large amounts of urine of low specific gravity, is probably due to a functional or organic disease of the brain. And there is also a possibility that the center in the medulla, which controls the renal blood supply, is as well as excretion, is affected. They give references here. And this book is from 2 years after the discovery of insulin. Disease in or about the hypophysis is often associated with diabetes insipidus, and Frank has suggested the theory that excessive function of this gland is the cause of the disease. The injection of pituitrin often helps these cases, which would rather make it seem as if hypofunction of the gland were more probable than excessive secretion. Minkowski advises that the amount of chlorides and specific gravity of the urine be determined after the ingestion of considerable salt. If both increase relatively more than the urine does, he believes that the power of excreting a concentrated urine is still possessed by the kidneys. Therefore, diminishing the amount of water drunk by the patients will help them. If the amount of urine increases relatively, the more a salt-free diet and one poor in protein will be of a help. In choosing a diet, it is necessary to avoid foods that cause indigestion or flatulence, particular restriction being placed on sugar, for when an excess of this is taken, it tends to raise the percentage of sugar in the blood, which aggravates the polyuria. Cold drinks, which are diuretic, must be given up, as cold milk, beer, cider, also watery fruits. A salt-poor and low-protein diet tends to diminish the quantity of urine when the kidneys do not concentrate the urine normally. So I'm curious. This is the second item that we found in the collection, one from before the discovery of insulin, this one from after the discovery of insulin, that refers to diabetes insipidus and diabetes mellitus as two separate conditions. Are these type 1 and type 2? Or is that something else? I'm curious. And I'm curious enough that I'm gonna Google. It is not. Diabetes insipidus is an uncommon disease that causes an imbalance of fluids in the body. The imbalance causes you to produce large amounts of urine and makes you thirsty. It is not type 1 diabetes. So type 1 is autoimmune, but insulin deficiency, again. Type 2 is not autoimmune, but has similar effects of insulin deficiency. Interesting. AB, you got your undergrad degree somewhere expensive that issues their diplomas in Latin. Actually, quite possibly Chi squared. Did you? Artium baccalaureate. It's just a bachelor's degree. Got it. Okay. Snorpenbos, your comment about they had no idea how diabetes actually worked, I don't think is accurate, but understandable that you thought that, because it's called diabetes, but diabetes insipidus is a completely separate disorder that is caused by something completely different. It is not the same disease at all, and is indeed a condition caused by excessive urination. Diabetes mellitus, in perhaps no other disease, is diet such a matter of vital importance as in diabetes mellitus. For as time has gone on and one after another procedure or drug has been vaunted as a cure only to be cast aside as entirely wanting, diet has remained as the one factor which is capable, if properly employed, of resting the glycogenic function of the liver, and in all but the most severe and necessarily fatal cases is also capable of bringing about a condition more or less approaching the normal. By its proper employment, the mild cases are clinically cured. The moderately severe are rendered mild, and the most of the very severe are changed to cases of moderate severity. The discovery of insulin, an extract of islands of Longerons, is said to make diets unnecessary, but as yet its production is limited and the cost almost prohibitive. I did not put these marks in the book. At some point in time, somebody was researching the discovery of insulin and put 2 little orange marks in the margin here. Diets will therefore be necessary in most of the cases. An extended discussion of the pathological physiology and disturbed metabolism of diabetes is not necessarily a part of a book on dietetics, but it is necessary to discuss the important changes of metabolism if one is to appreciate, to even a small degree, the importance and significance of diet in the varying phases of this disease. Interest naturally centers about carbohydrate metabolism, which formerly was thought to be the only matter of importance, and that the metabolism of protein and fat in no way entered into the question for the diabetic. Following this, the importance of fats in the production of acidosis was discovered, and last of all, the fact that the body could synthesize sugar out of protein. With this last, the whole question of diet in diabetes was revolutionized at a stroke, and an explanation was at hand as to why certain cases failed to become sugar-free on a meat-fat diet. Another significant change of thought has been that formerly attention was focused on the glycosuria as the most important index of a disturbed sugar metabolism, whereas now the hyperglycemia, which always accompanies glycosuria, except in the few cases of so-called renal diabetes, occupies chief attention, since it is found that many cases of diabetes get rid of their glycosuria and would formerly have been pronounced cured, but are found to retain their hyperglycemia, thus still showing evidence of a disturbed sugar metabolism. It goes on. But so they know a bit more once 1923 comes around about the actual scientific causes. They're aware of insulin, but this is a medical text, not so much a guide. I'm gonna skip, I think. Well, I won't skip it, but I won't spend much time with this one. The thing is, they're putting the cart before the horse. They were saying the kidney affected the pancreas and caused diabetes. It was on the page I didn't read. I believe you. What we have here is a book called Treatment of Diabetes Mellitus by Jocelyn. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this one because I actually want to go to his book that is intended as a guide for actual patients. But we will look at this one briefly. RC 660 J6 1928. Jocelyn was one of kind of the leaders in treatment of diabetes. This is from 1928. Oh, geez. Oh, good. It was like, I took the bookmark out, but it thankfully remembered where I had opened. You're loving the word dietetic. So dietetics is essentially the sort of where nutritionists grew out of. Dietetics was the pseudoscience of determining what an appropriate diet would be for somebody. So analyzing what we eat and in what quantities and what's healthy and what's not. It was used for the formulation of things like the food pyramid and determining what would be served at public schools and things like that. And it was sort of scientifically based, but also wouldn't meet today's standards with regard to science. So that's why I say pseudoscience. But yeah, it's the origin of dietitian. I mean, it sounds like it could be. I don't know. What I wanted to highlight here is actually just this picture, because I came across this when I was looking for an image to use for the media to promote today's episode. And it's an illustration in this book on treating diabetes of differences in standard foods. So many words still in use based on words nobody uses anymore. Yeah. So specifically, like this illustration here in this book that's intended for physicians about how to treat diabetes is pointing out that like it's figure 36, variations in the sizes of common foods. C in the diagrams, C equals carbohydrates, P equals protein, and F equals fat. The food values recorded are for gross weights and only approximate, but these are common foods, and we know eggs are not all the same size. Potatoes are not always the same size. Oranges are not always the same size, and grapefruits are not always the same size. These are the examples that are given here, but if you've got, it says here, the paragraph before it, it's like, errors in eggs may compensate themselves because the eggs average about 60 grams and must so average in some communities. Errors in potatoes, oranges, and grapefruits must necessarily be very great. The largest of the three potatoes is actually a small potato. The potato weighing 60 grams is about the size of an egg. The oranges from left to right are sold under the trade names of 126, 170, and 250 to the box, and the grapefruit under the trade names of 28, 64, and 96 to the box. It is partly on account of the ease with which large errors in the carbohydrate content of food may occur that it is desirable to give to patients with a low carbohydrate tolerance their carbohydrate in the form of 5% vegetables exclusively. For an error in weighing reaching 120 grams, 4 ounces, would amount only to a few grams of carbohydrate. So the reason this illustration is here is because in patients who are extremely sensitive to carbohydrates in their diet, the calculations need to be precise in order for them to manage the condition. And if you give them a 120-gram potato versus a 90-gram potato, that's a difference of 6 grams of carbohydrates. And so the advice he's giving is that it's better to stick with the vegetables that don't have the carbs or that have 5% carbs because there's not as much risk of miscalculating by a variation in the size of the vegetable. You love that the only profession in the U.S. that has, as a standard, uses metric is medicine. They don't use ounces for syringe. Yeah. So I found this illustration to be really interesting because if you're somebody who has to pay particular attention to the sugars, this small grapefruit with 20 grams of carbs versus this standard size grapefruit with 40 grams of carbs, that really changes like what you're eating and your calculations as a whole. And today, like, you would be like, okay, I had a grapefruit, and stick it in your app where you're tracking your foods, and it would be like, oh yeah, you had a grapefruit, you had this many carbs. But the app never really asks you how big was the grapefruit, so that it can determine exactly how many carbs were in that grapefruit. There may be some that go to that length, but just consider, like, that's a lot of extra work to be able to manage your diet, which is why in this book from the 20s, this leading scientist in the treatment of diabetes was advocating for kind of just avoid these and go with things that are going to be easier to calculate and put less burden on the patient. Carb calculation is still a pain, yeah. So I thought that illustration was interesting and worth sharing. All right, I'm going to do a quick look here. I have many other publications by Jocelyn. We've got one called Diabetic Manual, that's for the patients. We've got one called Diabetic Manual for Doctor and Patient. I have another one called Diabetic Manual. We've got a number of them. I have Physician's Book of Menus for Diabetics. We're going to glance at this one. This is by Eli Lilly. RC 909 L53 1946. So I'm jumping ahead. This is from the Lilly Research Laboratories, Eli Lilly being the first company to produce artificial insulin for the market. Physician's Book of Menus for Diabetics, 5th edition. This is from 1946. And the tabs on the side, you can navigate this book by grams of protein. You also have child diets, food values, conversion tables, and normal weights. So if I'm just going to jump at random here. Let's see. It is a daily menu. So, okay, meals. In the morning, fruit, group 4, which has an asterisk. You're supposed to refer to equivalents and substitutes to find out what's in group 4. But so you can have fruit, cereal, egg, bacon, crisp bacon, bread, milk, coffee with cream, butter or fat. Sample menu, number 557. For this morning meal is 1 medium orange, a half a cup of cornflakes, 1 egg, 2 thin strips of crisp bacon 3 1/4 inches long, a half an average slice of bread, a half a glass or 3 1/3 ounces of milk, 4 tablespoons or 2 ounces of cream and coffee, and 1 1/2 teaspoons of butter or fat. For your midday meal, 1 1/2 slices of American cheese, 1 large 3% vegetable salad, 1/4 cup of young peas, 1/3 of an average slice of bread, 2 medium peach halves. Oh dear. That was weird. Um, 3/4 glass or 5 ounces of milk, 4 tablespoons of cream or 2 ounces of coffee, and 2.5 teaspoons of butter. You understand why some Americans are reluctant to switch to metric? Oh gosh. I mean, there are a lot of things not to like about Dewey. Snorkel boss. The Dewey Decimal System has its problems. Many of them rooted in white supremacy. It's interesting to me that they do a lot of bacon. There's a good amount of sugar in bacon. At least today there is. Yeah, that is interesting. I wasn't aware of the sugar content of bacon. European bacon has a lot less sugar because of the pig's diet. Americans think that the rule of law is an exercise in advanced storytelling. Without good costuming, we're bad at things. Yeah. All right, I'm going to look at the evening meal here. Meat, lean, cooked. Apparently you get as much as you want. It doesn't give an example or a measurement in the sample menu. 3/8 cup of green beans, apparently. 3/4 cup of diced carrots, 1/3 of an average slice of bread, 1 1/4 slices of pineapple, a glass or 6 2/3 ounces of milk, again, 2-ounce cup of coffee, and 2 teaspoons of fat. And so they give multiple of these sample menus. This menu is in the 100 grams of fat section in the 50 grams of protein section. Let's not talk about our many, many ways to glaze ham. Yeah. And so it's very broken down. This would be a difficult book to get the hang of. I think once you got the hang of it, it would be fairly easy to do. As far as it tells you a menu that you can stick to, but I think getting used to it would be a challenge. I do want to look at a couple of other things. We spent a lot of time in the pre. That was a post one that came from the people who sold insulin. I did want to pull this out again. This is the National Grange Family Cookbook from Country Kitchens, call number TX715N3Z8, 1979. So 50 years after the discovery of insulin, more than 50 years after. But honestly, in everything that I found, and I looked through lots of cookbooks, because I was specifically looking for cookbooks. I found a lot of household guides and scientific-based medical guides and things like that. I was looking for cookbooks. And in all of the cookbooks, this was the shining example of providing a variety of options for diabetics to eat as far as recipes are concerned. Cookbooks either did not address special diets at all, like the common cookbooks that everybody had in the 70s and 80s, like Better Homes and Gardens and the Betty Crocker cookbooks and things like that, the cookbooks that are literally on everybody's shelves, don't mention it at all. This book from the National Grange has a whole section of special diabetic recipes, which I thought was remarkable a few weeks ago when we were looking at National Grange stuff, and I still think is remarkable today after having looked through a lot of stuff specifically to help people live with the condition of diabetes. Because I looked through cookbooks for diabetic recipes, and none of them have a section with multiple diabetic recipes. So, you remember when the whole Watkins diet became a fad? Your mom's, that's just an old hospital diet from the 40s. Yeah, I believe you. I don't know which one the Watkins one is. Are you thinking Atkins? But yeah. Wholesome, delicious, and appetizing are the words to describe a diabetic diet because it allows such a variety of favorite foods. A balanced diabetic menu can include lean meats, fish, poultry, eggs, cheese, and milk products, plus a wide range of vegetables and many fruits. A list like that makes it hard to believe that once a person is diagnosed as having diabetes, their eating habits have to change. Protein, fat, and calorie intake must be watched, but carbohydrate intake must be monitored carefully so the body receives only what it is able to handle. The recipes in this section have been submitted by Mrs. Melvin Steepun of Quincy Grange number 990 in Quincy, Washington, and all Grange members truly appreciate her thoughtful cooperation. Helpful hints for these special dietetic recipes include 1. Measure ingredients carefully. 2. Always soften gelatin in at least 1 tablespoon cold water before using. 3. Where recipes call for lightly oiled or greased dishes, it is suggested that you use vegetable cooking spray according to directions on the container. Mrs. Steepun suggests the use of Frutex from the Crescent Company as a thickening agent in whipped toppings, egg whites, fruit pies, and syrups, and other syrups. It is low in calories and therefore preferable to cornstarch. It is strongly recommended that you check with your doctor before using any sweetener, artificial or natural, if you are on a diabetic diet. Lord Portico, thank you so much for your help today, and I hope that you have a good evening. And yeah, they have pages of recipes in here. I'm actually going to have to go soon, too. We are running slightly over time, but I did want to share, like, cottage cheese luncheon loaf, tuna mold, apple and celery salad, cherry mold salad, Dutch bean salad, pumpkin aspic, baked custard, tangy seafood cocktail sauce. They've got ice cream recipes, canned fruits. They actually have, like, most of these recipes in here are dessert type recipes, but for diabetics. That's really interesting to me. They have some like appetizer type things, some salads, some gelatin salads, and ice creams, French dressing, low-cal dressing, orange sauce, low-calorie pancakes, Knox blocks, combining Knox with Jell-O brand gelatin, combining 2 different brands of gelatin with diet Kool-Aid for flavoring. Interesting. So yeah, a whole section. Pancakes with cottage cheese. Philip, if you want to know more, let me know and I can get you specifics on some of these recipes. I do want to take a quick glance. We just have one more item here. It is the Complete Gourmet Nutrition Cookbook. This is the one from 1980 that I found. The call number is TX715D282 1980. And that can be found in our catalog. But the Complete Gourmet Nutrition Cookbook includes the U.S. Senate Diet, Margaret C. Dean, MSRD, and it has a section on special diseases, food patterns for minimizing diabetes mellitus, hypoglycemia, allergies, arteriosclerosis, and atherosclerosis, hypertension, and cirrhosis of the liver. Easy to prepare recipes and menus. Diabetes mellitus is the 4th leading cause of death by disease in the United States. Again, this was 1980, according to the Senate Committee's dietary goals. Diabetes is an ancient disease. It is traceable as far back as 1500 BC, when Egyptians are known to have had symptoms. In the 1st century AD, a Greek physician wrote of a malady in which the body ate its own flesh and gave off large quantities of urine. He gave it the name diabetes. The mysteries of diabetes have been the subject of study by scientists and physicians for many years. Today, we are continuing to learn of new relationships of diabetes to other conditions of the body as we search for the yet unfound cure of the disease. There are some things we do know about diabetes mellitus. It has been found to be a hereditary disease. It is defined in terms of symptoms which appear as diabetes develops: increased thirst, increased urination, increased hunger, and weight loss. The weight loss may occur early in the progress of the disease, even though the person is obese. The other symptoms associated with diabetes may be blurred vision, skin irritation, or infections. Obesity and other diseases may also cause diabetes. A person who has the symptoms and ignores them for a period of time will show a fluid and electrolyte imbalance, acidosis characterized by acid odor or breath, loss of strength, and finally will go into a coma. Because diabetes symptoms are related to the sugar level in the blood, diabetes is called a disease of carbohydrate metabolism. The intimate relationships of carbohydrate metabolism with protein and fat metabolism will impress upon us that diabetes is a disease that is caused by a lack of insulin, a secretion of the pancreas. A lack may be only partial or unavoidable. The problem of insulin affects, more or less, each of the basic food nutrients, especially the interrelated metabolism of the two fuel-supplying nutrients, carbohydrate and fat. Though its precise role is not entirely clear, insulin has an effect on the body's control mechanisms. It is believed to aid in the transport of glucose through the cell membrane. It enhances the conversion of glucose, a simple sugar, to glycogen and its storage in the liver. It stimulates the conversion of glucose to fat. Primarily, insulin in the diabetic is lacking to facilitate the operation of normal controls of the blood sugar level. Glucose cannot be oxidized properly through the main glycolytic pathway in the cell to furnish energy. It therefore builds up in the blood. It continues. So 1980, again, sort of a medically based cookbook, but providing some information about what the science said at the time about diabetes. They give a 1-day pattern of meal here. Milk, 2 servings, vegetables as desired, fruits, fresh or unsweetened, 3 servings, breads, 6 servings. Note, bread exchanges including vegetables, starchy. Meats, baked, broiled, or roasted, 6 servings, and fats, 4 servings. I want to see, so then they give actual, sample menus for a 1,500 calorie diabetic diet. Breakfast: orange juice, scrambled egg, whole wheat toast, non-fat milk, coffee or tea. Lunch: vegetable soup, tuna fish sandwich, toasted, special mayonnaise, apple, beverage. Dinner: roast turkey, asparagus tips, mashed potato with vegetable fat, hot roll, fresh fruit cup, non-fat milk. These are the ones with asterisks. They have recipes included in this book. These menus don't sound terrible. These menus sound like menus from the 1980s. These honestly sound like what you would find in a school lunch or an institutionally prepared meal in the 1980s. They've added tea, indeed. And finally, a breakfast that didn't include bacon. And whole wheat toast is indeed good. Yeah, it sounds like a nice menu. So by the 1980s, they've relaxed some of the restrictions. They better understand the science, and they've added back in foods that were previously not allowed under what they thought was proper approaches. And so I thought this was interesting because, honestly, aside from the National Grange book that was intended for a general audience, this is the only other book, even modern cookbooks, that I found that specifically included a section with recipes for diabetics. Now, I didn't go past 1980. I didn't really look at super modern things, which we do have in our collection, but I didn't go to the 2020s or the 2000s and beyond. But it wasn't something that the major cookbooks were covering. It was not in the Betty Crocker. It was not in the Better Homes and Gardens. It was not, they didn't even mention the subject. So that's why the National Grange Cookbook to me, while it was remarkable to me before I looked into this, is still remarkable to me now after having looked into it, because having an entire section on recipes for people with diabetes was just unusual. Beyond like the scientific, here as a doctor you should know what your patients can eat. But having something that's intended for the general public, we had a couple, like very early on, we had what was essentially a handbook for housewives, but it was specifically a whole book on preparing meals for people who were ill. And otherwise, people just didn't touch on it. Cookbooks didn't cover it. And so the National Grange Cookbook to me stands out as being particularly good at, it had a whole section with a variety of recipes. So I thought it was pretty cool. Pineapple's a bad idea though, lots of fructose. I mean, it's the 1980s, pineapple was very popular. You're relieved they don't have a recipe for milk? All right, we have reached past the end of time. We've gone over just a little bit, so I am gonna have to end the stream and we're gonna have to raid over to someone else. We will be back next week. I will be back at the normal time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Wednesday. Next week, we will be looking at the Household of Ruth. So I believe it was last week, we were looking at the Oddfellows materials, and we just didn't have time to get to the women's auxiliary organization, Household of Ruth, and so that is what we're going to look at next week. We're going to spend the entire 2 hours looking at stuff from the Household of Ruth. So hopefully you can join me next week for that. Recipe for milk: get 100 almonds, milk them by hand into tiny thimbles. Oh dear. Let me go ahead and see who we're going to raid. I don't know who's live at the moment. Wow, lots of people are live. But you know, I like raiding this channel. It's educational, it's animals. And their stream title today is May the 4th Be With You, R2D Tuna, Open Sea Cam. So we're gonna go over to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and spend some time with the Open Sea Cam. I do wanna thank everybody for joining me today. It has been wonderful having you all here. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. So let me go ahead and start this raid. And have a good night. Explore those archives, pay attention to history, investigate, and learn. Learn. Thank you for joining.